The morning sky above occupied Europe was an eerie shade of gray. October 14th, 1944. It was supposed to be a routine bombing escort mission. The USAAF's 8th Fighter Command had flown thousands of sorties over the past few months, escorting B-17 bombers through the skies over Nazi Germany. But that day, for one American pilot, everything would change in the blink of an eye. Captain Daniel "Danny" McConnell sat in the cockpit of his P-51 Mustang, squinting against the early morning sun as the twin engines hummed below him. It was just another day in the skies, protecting the heavy bombers from the deadly German fighters that seemed to always be on their tail. He had flown hundreds of sorties, each one a mix of monotony and terror. But today felt different. The air was calm, the radio frequencies quiet. McConnell adjusted his goggles and checked his instruments. The Mustang's engine purred steadily. He'd flown this plane thousands of miles, across the English Channel, over the forests of France, and deep into German-held territory. The P-51 was a sleek, powerful aircraft, a long-range fighter built for speed and agility. McConnell had always felt at home inside it. It was fast, dependable, and packed with firepower. "Red Leader, this is Red 4, all clear ahead." The voice crackled in his earpiece, one of his wingmen. The bomber formation ahead was secure for the moment. Their target was a key industrial complex deep in Germany, a place that held vital supplies for the Nazi war machine. The mission had been simple enough: get in, defend the bombers, and get out. But for McConnell, there was no such thing as a simple mission. Not anymore. The skies ahead were clear, but then came the transmission that would change everything. "Red Leader, we've got a jet incoming, 12 o'clock high, moving fast." McConnell's heart skipped a beat. A jet? He adjusted his headset to listen more closely, but the message was clear. The Luftwaffe had unleashed something new, something faster than anything the Allies had faced. The Messerschmitt Me 262, the world's first operational jet-powered fighter, was no longer a rumor. It was here, right in front of them. McConnell's thoughts raced. The P-51 was a powerful aircraft, no doubt, but against a jet? It was a different kind of beast. The Me 262 was far faster than anything McConnell had ever flown against. Its twin jet engines could push it to speeds of over 500 miles per hour, an unimaginable advantage over the P-51's top speed of around 440 miles per hour. The jet wasn't just fast, it was a weapon of precision, designed to destroy bombers in rapid, explosive strikes. "Red Leader, he's coming in fast. Too fast for us to catch. What's the plan?" McConnell knew his squadron was outmatched. He looked ahead, scanning the sky for any sign of the Me 262. He could feel his pulse quickening. They had trained for every kind of enemy fighter, but this was something new, something they weren't prepared for. The jet appeared suddenly, a silver streak across the sky. The Me 262 came in low, aiming directly for the bomber formation. The sheer speed of the jet left McConnell momentarily stunned. It was unlike anything he had ever encountered. It was like the future of warfare had just arrived, and it was coming for them. McConnell's instincts kicked in. There was no time to think about the odds. He had a job to do. The formation needed to be protected, and McConnell was the one who had to make sure the bombers didn't get caught in the crossfire. "Break formation! Break!" he called over the radio. His squadron immediately scattered, diving to evade the incoming threat. McConnell pulled his P-51 into a tight turn, following the jet with his eyes as it zipped by. He knew the enemy fighter would make its first attack run soon. The question was, could they stop it? The jet swooped in, firing its powerful 30mm cannons at the bombers, and the explosion of tracer rounds lit up the sky. McConnell's heart raced. This was a moment of truth. His P-51, while agile, wasn't designed to fight jets head-on. It was fast, yes, but it was built to escort bombers, to protect them from enemy fighters, not to engage in high-speed dogfights with jet-powered machines. McConnell gritted his teeth. His eyes narrowed as he sized up the situation. The Me-262 had made its first strike, but it was already pulling away. The jet wasn't interested in the dogfight. It was using its speed to strike fast and then retreat. That's when McConnell realized something crucial. The jet had a weakness. The pilot's reliance on sheer speed made it vulnerable. The Me-262 didn't have the same ability to turn on a dime like the P-51. It was fast and powerful, but it wasn't invincible. Red 4, follow my lead. We're going to predict his next move. McConnell had only moments to act. He knew this was his only chance. As the Me-262 pulled into a climb to position for another pass, McConnell made his move. Instead of chasing the jet directly, he banked his P-51 to intercept its trajectory, cutting across its flight path. It was a gamble. The jet could outfly him in seconds, but McConnell trusted his instincts. He didn't chase the jet. He predicted its moves and placed himself in its way, using the advantage of his propeller-driven plane's maneuverability to block its escape route. And then, in the blink of an eye, McConnell fired. The Mustang's machine guns erupted, tracer rounds tearing into the Me-262. McConnell watched, his breath held, as the jet's tail ignited, and it began to plummet toward the ground. The sky fell silent. McConnell pulled up, staring down at the flaming wreckage of the Me-262 as it spiraled into the earth below. The radio crackled with disbelief, but McConnell didn't hear it. His hands were shaking. He had done it. Against all odds, he had outflown the most advanced fighter in the world. Red Leader! You did it! You actually did it! McConnell's mind raced. He couldn't quite believe it himself. The jet, the terror of the skies, had been brought down by nothing but courage, instinct, and a little bit of luck. But as he flew back to base, his heart still pounding, one thing was clear. The war had changed. This was no longer a fight between machines. This was a fight for survival, and it was a fight that could still be won by human ingenuity. The radio static in McConnell's headset buzzed as he glided through the sky. The airfield was just ahead, and his Mustang's engine hummed steadily under him, a quiet contrast to the chaotic battle that had unfolded only minutes earlier. As he descended toward the runway, the adrenaline was starting to fade, but McConnell still felt the tightness in his chest. The sky was silent now, the echoes of battle replaced by the soft whine of his P-51's propeller. The words of his squadron mates still rattled through his mind. He had done the impossible. In one move, against all the odds, he had outflew a Me-262, the world's most advanced jet fighter. But even as his hands remained steady on the controls, McConnell's thoughts churned. What had just happened? Was it luck? Was it bravery? Or was it sheer desperation? His Mustang hit the tarmac with a soft thud, the wheels spinning against the concrete. He taxied to his assigned spot, the roar of other engines still ringing in his ears. The ground crew waved him in, signaling for him to park, but McConnell barely noticed them. He could see the hangars, the men moving in and out, preparing for the next mission. For a brief moment, he felt detached, like the war had moved on without him. The Mustang rolled to a stop, its engines still idling as McConnell unbuckled his harness. He felt the cool sweat of his flight suit sticking to his skin as he took a moment to compose himself. His hands still shook. "McConnell! You did it! You really did it!" It was Lieutenant Joe Foster, one of McConnell's wingmen. The young pilot's face was lit with excitement as he jogged over to the Mustang. Foster's expression was a mixture of awe and disbelief. To him and the rest of the squadron, McConnell's success was something out of a combat manual, the story of a lone pilot facing an enemy beyond his limits and coming out on top. McConnell gave a half-hearted smile. He hadn't quite processed everything yet. "Yeah, I guess I did," he muttered. He was trying to sound casual, trying to shake off the weight of what he'd just done. But there was a growing sense that this wasn't just another mission. "This is going to be talked about for years," Foster said, eyes wide. "You took down a jet, a Me-262, the fastest aircraft in the sky." McConnell didn't know what to say. His brain was still processing the events, the incredible speed of the jet, the intensity of the moment. He had taken risks he hadn't even thought through. He had simply acted on instinct like any veteran pilot would, but now that it was over, he realized how much more was at stake. The airfield suddenly felt small, as if the weight of what had happened was too much for it to contain. The ground crew pulled up beside the Mustang, ready to start the debrief, but McConnell wasn't sure he was ready for that conversation. He had done his job, but he had also done something extraordinary. Something that might just change the way the war was fought. One man, in one plane, had brought down the most advanced fighter in the world. It wasn't supposed to be possible. "Red leader to base, mission complete. We're back safe." McConnell radioed in, his voice steady despite the turmoil swirling inside him. "Roger that, Red Leader. We'll see you on the ground. Good job, McConnell." The words were flat, clinical, but they were all McConnell needed to hear. He had done his job. And now, the reality of the situation was setting in. His mind was racing through the possible consequences of what he had just done. McConnell sat there, staring out over the runway as the crew started to unload his aircraft. He didn't know it yet, but his actions that day would go down in history. The P-51 Mustang, often considered the perfect fighter of the time, had just proven that the right pilot with the right mix of courage and instinct could overcome anything, even the Me-262. As McConnell walked away from the Mustang and toward the hangar, he could feel the eyes of the ground crew on him. They were whispering, some in admiration, some in awe, some in disbelief. The fact that he had just fought a jet, and won, was something the world wasn't quite ready to understand. He wasn't ready to understand it himself. For a moment, McConnell thought about the jet's pilot. The Me-262 had been fast, efficient, powerful. But in the end, it had been no match for human instinct, for the quick thinking that separated good pilots from great ones. And in that moment, McConnell had used everything he had learned in his years of flying. His knowledge of his plane, his awareness of the battlefield, his ability to predict an enemy's next move. But even as McConnell processed the battle, something gnawed at the back of his mind. How had he done it? It wasn't just about a lucky shot. It wasn't just about quick reflexes. It wasn't about anything tangible. It was the courage to face something that seemed impossible and decide that no matter what, he would fight through it. The news of McConnell's feat spread quickly through the ranks. The radio chatter was endless, with his fellow pilots calling him a hero, a legend, a living legend. But even as McConnell returned to base and prepared for the next mission, something within him felt strangely unsettled. He had done something no one expected, something that had changed the very nature of air combat. Courage had won the day. But what did that mean for the future? Would his feat be enough to give the Allies the edge against the jet-powered enemy? Could courage alone continue to carry them to victory? As McConnell sat down for his debriefing, he realized that what he had just experienced wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about what came next. The war wasn't over, and the fight for air superiority was only just beginning. In Part 3, McConnell's victory would be analyzed by his superiors, and the world would begin to realize the implications of his feat. But McConnell himself was about to face the most difficult challenge yet, finding his place in the new air war. The news of McConnell's victory over the Me-262 spread quickly through the ranks. His squadron, already seasoned in the heat of battle, now viewed their leader with a newfound reverence. A jet, the terror of the skies, had been brought down by a propeller-driven Mustang. The enemy had introduced a weapon that seemed invincible, but McConnell had shown them that even the most advanced technology had its weaknesses. And those weaknesses could be exploited by the right pilot with the courage to face the impossible. Back at base, McConnell was greeted with a mixture of awe and confusion. His fellow pilots were stunned, unable to fully grasp the gravity of what he had just achieved. McConnell, ever the modest pilot, downplayed the moment. He had done his job, he had followed his instincts, and he had come out on top. But there was a deep, unshakable feeling of disbelief that lingered with him. He had just downed a jet, something that was never supposed to happen. And yet, here he was, back on the ground, the hero of the day. "McConnell!" It was Lieutenant Foster again, his young face bright with excitement. "You really did it, didn't you?" McConnell nodded, but his eyes were distant. He had already been through the debriefing, the questions about his tactics, the analysis of the engagement. The officers were asking the same thing over and over. "How did you do it?" "It wasn't luck, it was instinct." McConnell's response, while simple, was met with silence. There was something profound about the simplicity of it. The Me-262, which had terrorized the skies and forced a re-evaluation of aerial combat, had been outflown by a veteran pilot using the tools of an earlier age. It wasn't about speed or firepower. It was about understanding the enemy, using the environment, and trusting in the skills that had been honed in countless dogfights. As the days passed, McConnell's victory took on a life of its own. The press picked up the story, and soon his name was being broadcast across radio stations. His feat was the kind of story that seemed too good to be true. An American pilot outmaneuvers and destroys a German jet in a fight that no one had believed could be won. The newspapers hailed him as a hero, and his victory was compared to legendary aerial engagements from the early days of the war. But for McConnell, the weight of the Yashi recognition felt surreal. He wasn't fighting for fame or glory. He was just doing his job. But as the world took notice, the pressure mounted. The RAF and USAAF began to look at the implications of McConnell's victory. Was it a fluke, or could it be replicated? They had to know what made it possible. The Me-262 was the future of warfare, and McConnell's victory over it wasn't just a victory for the P-51 Mustang, it was a glimpse into the future of aerial combat. Intelligence officers and military analysts began scrutinizing every detail of McConnell's engagement. They wanted to understand how a propeller-driven plane could defeat a jet. They wanted to know every maneuver, every calculated risk McConnell had taken. The dogfight between McConnell's P-51 Mustang and the Me-262 was dissected for months. Could this victory be replicated? What would it mean for future engagements? As the analysis progressed, the conclusion became clear. McConnell's victory wasn't just about outmaneuvering the jet. It was about understanding its weaknesses. The Me-262's speed made it unbeatable in a straight-line chase, but it wasn't designed for sustained turns or slow speed maneuvers. It needed space to unleash its power. McConnell had exploited that, forcing the jet into a series of moves it couldn't recover from. However, McConnell's actions were part of a larger shift in thinking about how air battles were fought. Courage was one thing, but understanding the enemy, predicting their moves, and adapting to their strengths and weaknesses was the true mark of a great pilot. As McConnell sat in briefings and answered questions, he began to feel the pressure of his newfound fame. Everyone wanted to know about his tactics, about the exact sequence of events that had led to his victory. McConnell, ever humble, had no intention of taking full credit. He knew the team effort it took to win the war. He knew that his wingmen, the ground crews, and every other soldier in the war effort had contributed to the success that led to this moment. But the military brass couldn't ignore McConnell's achievement. They knew the implications of what he had done. The P-51 Mustang, an aircraft built for speed, maneuverability, and long-range escort, had just proven it could stand toe-to-toe with the most advanced aircraft in the world. McConnell had showed them that speed alone wasn't enough. It took skill, instinct, and timing to defeat a jet fighter. In the weeks following his engagement, McConnell's story was featured in military training programs. He was hailed as the pilot who proved that no matter how advanced the technology, the human spirit and instincts could still triumph. His story became the subject of lectures at flight schools across the country. Young pilots were taught about McConnell's tactics, how he had predicted the enemy's moves, how he had used intuition and bravery to defeat the odds. But McConnell, in the midst of all the fanfare, remained humble. He never sought the spotlight. He didn't want to be a hero. For him, the fight was always about survival, about protecting the mission, and about doing his part. The accolades, the recognition, they didn't matter. What mattered was that he had done his duty. Months passed, and the jet age began to dominate the skies. Jets were faster, more powerful, and they began to shape the course of air warfare. The P-51 Mustang, while still in service, began to show its age. But McConnell's legacy would remain forever intertwined with the Mustang's success. His victory over the Me-262 proved that courage, not technology, could win the day. By 1945, as the war drew to a close, McConnell found himself regarded as a living legend. But even with his fame, McConnell knew one thing. It wasn't the jet that had lost that day. It was the arrogance of believing that a new machine could always win. And it wasn't his Mustang that had won. It was the pilot inside the machine who had made the difference. The war was over by 1945, but the reverberations of Captain McConnell's victory would continue to shape aerial combat for years to come. His fight with the Me-262, the first German jet fighter, had been the stuff of legend. A moment where a propeller-driven P-51 Mustang had faced off against a jet that was supposed to be unbeatable and won. But McConnell, ever the humble pilot, knew the fight wasn't just about outflying the enemy, it was about the human element that defined warfare. In the years after the war, McConnell became a living legend in aviation circles. Pilots from every corner of the globe heard the story of how a lone American pilot had used courage, strategy, and raw instinct to defeat the most advanced fighter in the sky. Military training manuals began to incorporate McConnell's tactics into their coursework. The P-51 Mustang, often overshadowed by faster jets in the post-war years, found a renewed respect for its role in one of the most iconic air battles of the war. But McConnell's legacy was more than just his victory in that one fight. His actions had sparked a shift in the way that military strategists and pilots thought about aerial combat. It wasn't about having the fastest aircraft or the most advanced technology. McConnell's victory proved that human ingenuity, adaptability, and courage were just as important as speed and firepower. In the months that followed the battle, McConnell was called in by his superiors for a series of debriefings. They wanted to know everything from his decision-making process to his thoughts on the Me-262's vulnerabilities. He explained in the simplest terms that his success had come from not trying to match the jet's speed, but to use its predictability against it. He had focused on the strengths of his P-51 Mustang, its maneuverability and its ability to force the Me-262 into a situation where it was at its weakest. It wasn't about trying to outrun the jet, McConnell had said in one of the briefings. It was about putting myself in the right position to intercept it at the right moment. The more McConnell spoke, the more he realized how significant this shift in thinking was. Jet fighters like the Me-262 had redefined the future of air combat, yet McConnell's victory proved that courage and experience could still play a decisive role. The jet age had arrived, but it wasn't the only future of aerial warfare. The piston-engine fighters were still relevant, especially when flown by a pilot who understood how to exploit weaknesses in the enemy. The story of McConnell's victory spread through the ranks, and it became a symbol of defiance against seemingly insurmountable odds. While the world was transitioning into an era dominated by jet-powered fighters, McConnell's tale reminded everyone that, at the end of the day, it was the man behind the controls that made all the difference. Even after the war, the legend of McConnell grew. Many pilots in post-war flight schools were taught about his engagement with the Me-262 as an example of how instinct, courage, and knowing your aircraft could change the outcome of any battle. McConnell was invited to speak at numerous events, and in his quiet, unassuming way, he told his story. He spoke of the moments when everything seemed impossible, when he had no choice but to trust in his instincts, his training, and the P-51 Mustang that had carried him through it all. I didn't have a choice that day, McConnell often said. It was either act or be taken out of the sky. I acted. His story became a part of the fabric of aviation history, not because he had achieved the impossible, but because he had redefined what was possible. The myth of the Me-262, the unstoppable jet, had been shattered by a pilot in a propeller-driven Mustang. It was proof that human bravery, even in the face of advanced technology, could still change the course of history. McConnell's place in the legacy of aviation didn't stop at his jet kill. He would go on to mentor countless young pilots, emphasizing the importance of thinking strategically, trusting in their training, and always believing that nothing was impossible. The Me-262 would go down in history as the symbol of the dawn of the jet age. But McConnell's victory would remain a reminder that even in a world of advanced technology, human spirit could still win out. In the decades that followed, McConnell was invited to attend several reunions of the USAAF veterans, where he would share stories of his time in combat and the experiences that shaped his incredible feat. During these reunions, he was often approached by young pilots who had heard the stories of his legendary engagement. They were eager to know more, not just about the mechanics of the battle, but about his mentality, his thought process during those critical moments. "How did you stay calm?" one young pilot asked. McConnell smiled softly. "You don't have time to be afraid. You just do it." His answer was simple, but profound. Courage wasn't something you could plan for. It was something you found in the heat of the moment. McConnell had shown the world that no matter how advanced the technology, the will of the pilot was still the deciding factor in aerial combat. As the years passed, McConnell quietly retired from active service. His name faded from the front-page headlines, but the story of that day, when one man outflew a jet using nothing but courage, remained in the hearts of those who had lived through it. McConnell's story would continue to be passed down to every new generation of aviators, a reminder that the human element could still overcome the odds. In the end, McConnell would be remembered not just as a hero of the skies, but as a man who taught the world that true bravery is not about the weapon you fly, but the courage in your heart.